Guys, welcome back. I've got Brian Foley with me again, and thankfully this time he's got a tank top on because if you guys don't know, he's in a very hot room so that he could get his computer up higher so that the video would be better, because there was some commentary, namely from Brian's girlfriend, that the video was no bueno last time. So we're going to get the video to a better spot. So Brian, thanks for coming back on. Guys, I want to talk to Brian a little bit about some of his coaching noticings that he saw at the games. And, I'll try to feed him a couple questions, but the whole point behind this conversation is just to give anybody listening to this an idea of how a coach would view the ups and the downs of a tough weekend, right? Because whether you're on a team, whether you're an individual, there was a lot of new things going on. There's a lot of uncertainty around CrossFit Games right now. So there was probably an added layer of stress. So I just want to kind of open it up with Brian and say, what were some of the great moments that you noticed this weekend, whether it be individual reps or workouts or just overarching stories? What were some of the great moments you saw this weekend?
Yeah, over that weekend, I think it was our expectations being met with Tia and Matt Fraser. I like their presence, I think, in the sport as one female and one male. You never really see them, I don't want to say shook or, letting antics or conversations of their placement get to them. They always look like they're in control. So as a coach, that's the most exciting thing to see. I actually just watched Fraser do the standard and watched him and Noah Olsen go head to head. And it was just fun to watch, because when you've watched enough of these events as a coach, you can tell which athlete is sitting there gaming off the rest of the field and waiting for time to capitalize. And then you could see the other athletes that maybe a little more starstruck, novice, or pushed a little too deep, and you can totally tell they're just hanging on for their life.
That was fascinating, and maybe you're thinking of the same moment, but it looked like Noah was coming back through the muscle-ups, and then all of a sudden Matt goes 5 touch-and-go power snatches at 135, and it's like, well, I guess we know the outcome of this one, once he did that. That was just awesome to watch. I mean, kudos to Noah for having a great weekend too, but that was really impressive from Fraser to finish.
Absolutely. I think, I don't want to speak on any behalf of Noah, but, I really like Noah as an athlete, and I want to see him kill everybody on the field. And I've yet to see him do that. And that's something Fraser has. So he's going to look and be like, ain't happening. I'll touch and go, risk all game plans, put it out on the floor because I know I have it. Whereas I really felt that Noah got to that end bar and stuck to his game plan he originally had, when where his performance was leading him was nowhere near what that game plan had anticipated. Or maybe it had, but you could see Gudmondsson and Fraser, just ahead of them. So yeah, I think it's just watching more of the consistent athletes at the top become more experienced, and we can learn from them. I think that's the most exciting things for the games. Where I sat was just watching who's been in it for a while. And there's still athletes that have been at the top for multi-years and are still making mistakes, which is interesting to me.
What would you say some of those mistakes that you noticed were?
Off the top of my head, that same event, watched the female version of standard catch her. I watched her go, and even the commentator picked on that after the event. She went 5, I believe, on one of her first sets of muscle ups. And it was that one rep caught her. And that was at the beginning of the muscle ups. And that to me should have never happened as a coach, and for that athlete, knowing that athlete, right? Where I think there was a little bit more of, being aggressive and saying, hey, let me capitalize and going for it. I'm all for that. But on the front end, if you know that, you feel that athletes are smart enough to know that the 4th rep is enough, especially you're at the top. You've had enough experience to know, if that one more rep is going to push you over the edge, and if that's going to knock off 20 seconds off your top total time, which is going to drop you 10 places.
Which is so fascinating too, because you see Fraser do 9, and then he goes for the 10th rep, and any other mere mortal, that probably would have cost them 30 seconds, but he recovered so quickly between the 10th rep and the first rep of the next set that he could handle it. So perhaps, perhaps Katrin has a little bit worse CP battery than, I mean, obviously we're talking apples and oranges here, but is that
Right.
sort of what you're saying, is that you just have to know yourself well enough to know what costs you 20 seconds and what doesn't?
Yeah, right. And that's experience, obviously, with the event. That's a new event. So, those athletes are going in the dark. But as far as the skill sets inside of the event, that is classic, right? And, personally, I know of Fraser, watching a video on YouTube of him explaining how many muscle ups he would do in a day. And it was every day, right? So, I mean, how many times has Fraser gone into training, dug deep, gone for max effort and failed? We should ask him that question. How many times have you done that? Cool. What were those reps? Oh, it was like an 8 to 12. I could go 15 in a lot of sessions, but I could never go past that. So just having that experience, I don't care how tired you are. If you're on 4 and you've had multiple experiences, let's call it 30 in your training year, where you failed at 9, 12, 15, there's a ceiling, right? So I think through Fraser training so much, as we know, for his personal volume, he's gained so many experiences and just pulling those. And he's able just to put it all together out there on the game, on the gridiron,
So let me put you on the spot here and say, going from now, let's not even put the open in for these guys, because they're not really thinking probably too much about the open. They'll go win a sanctional or, walk through the open and get top 20 or 30. What would you say that Fraser, Clair, Katrin, and Noah need to do between now and the next games to get even better? And I know, again, loaded question, but what are some of the things that come to your mind that would make them better based on what you saw?
As a whole group, have them structure departments of their training. Okay, so let's say weightlifting. We'll call it gymnastics endurance. Example, max snatch, max muscle ups. Push the spectrum for the sport. Push the maximums, organize your training, find maximums, and then underneath those maximums, they train as high as possible in volume as they can. But, I think there's room for these athletes to keep pushing. And I think through them pushing, their training is going to create the ceiling that is going to be higher than the games, right? Which, if I think Fraser's an outlier, so I want to take him out. Tia's getting there. Tia's stud. So take those 2 outliers out. I think they're getting there. I think they've organized their training and understand to be like, well, it should be built up higher than the event I'm going for, right? And I think there's a gap there between the athletes that are not able to go there or have the recoverability over that entire weekend. I think it comes back to their training volume, maximums, finding the ceilings, and then organizing the training all underneath that. And yeah.
So when you say organizing training, just so everybody listening can have a better idea, are you talking about total volume? Are you talking about the intensity? Are you talking about the movements that they do? What do you mean generally when you say organize their training?
Yeah, departments and skill sets. So maximums in the barbell, right? So let's just call it max snatch and max clean and jerk, right? They're obviously doing this at the games, and in a sense, this is their stage to do all of that, right? And to show the maximums and do all these awesome feats of fitness. But the way to word this simply is to say, I want the athlete to know and go back and be like, yeah, this is exactly what I did to get to these ceilings and maximums, because I organized my training of thought process to go, let's take Noah, and let's just say that he gets out of the games and is like muscle ups. Like, it was a muscle up deficiency in that event for him, and they want to focus on that for him personally. So for that, it's going to be a muscle up training regimen for the off season, right? And get something in there that's tangible, that's like, it's in the games, that was a slight weakness, it doesn't have to be huge, and you organize that and you show me a year progression of how you're going to fucking crush that workout next year. No questions asked. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, no, I think so. So those athletes aside, the standard aside, what are some of the things that you noticed at the games this year that maybe, oh, that's interesting, almost slightly confused? And let's keep it on an athlete standpoint or a competition standpoint. What are some of the things that you kind of weren't ready for?
The amount of cuts in throughout the weekend. Like, we knew they were coming, but I don't want to say, yeah, it got boring. It did. It got really boring for someone that's been watching this sport since 2012. And I say that because take a Fikowski, right? Hot year last year, right? He's been building, and that guy, I don't even think I remember watching an event with him, because I was catching up on the backlog of all this stuff, but the only event or anything I saw with that dude, which I was excited to watch all events, whether he won or not, was him talking about how he got cut early.
Yeah.
Oh, it didn't go how as I planned. And I'm like, wow, yeah, that was a big chunk. And, there was a big cut of well-rounded athletes. And whatever, it's not complaining about what they're doing with the system. I don't care. But, there were athlete comments as well going out there to where they were so honored to be out there with the top 10s, but wanted the top at least 20s or 30s to still be hanging around. And I think the magic in that, for me personally, is where you start to see all the athletes push themselves past, their maximums, being in a more hype environment for themselves, right? Rather than it being very small niche, which obviously we could go deep down in that conversation of what the environment should be or look like. But yeah, I think that was personally a broad noticing. It just kind of got boring into the segment. It was just so quick to just get down to these athletes, where I would have rather seen a couple dark horses in there that probably could have shook up the leaderboard if they had a chance.
Interesting. I've heard very different opinions on this. Some people really liked, from a spectator standpoint, I should say, really liked watching it because of the one heat scenario. So there were a number of events that only had one heat. So you kind of felt the excitement of the last heat for a number of events. Certainly some of the athletes were upset about it. I think some of our coaches really talked a lot about having a nicely well-rounded event before you get into the cuts to the 20s and the 10s, which I think is fair, right? Not having a heavy lift to get down to, was it 20 or 10? I'm not sure. It was one of the two. That's a tough one. That's a tough pill to swallow for some of those athletes. But why do you think anything still surprises us at the games? Like, why do you think anything could possibly still surprise us if the name of the games is unknown and unknowable? Like, are we just kind of tunnel vision in our thinking? What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. It's a conditioned expectation, right? That's how the momentum got built in the original years. It was like, oh, what's coming? But I think it's getting to the point where we know somewhat what's coming or what's expected for potential, right? There's not going to be like, oh my gosh, the world's not in shock of like what they're doing anymore. It's more of, there's a big community going like, okay, I'm around this realm. And yeah, I think it's just the way to build, again, I keep using the word hype today for whatever reason, but yeah, it's a mechanism through what we've been just expecting, right? So let's just say the games stay the exact same for 5 years. Do we all get bored?
Yeah, it's interesting. And training wise too, right? It's like define unknown and unknowable in training. It's just kind of an interesting concept, I think. But well, awesome, Brian. I think we could go down a lot of different rabbit holes on this one, but I appreciate you jumping in for a couple of minutes. Guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks.